Hey guys, Claire here. In today's video, we're going to talk about the latest episode of Archetypes. Now, this week's episode of Archetypes is all around the B word and its cousin, the D word, difficult. Now, the focus of the podcast is how these terms, the B word and the word difficult, are often wrongly applied to the strong-minded woman, especially in business. Meghan spoke to Mellody Hobson, Victoria Jackson, and the creator and writer Robin Thede, also joined by an alum of Northwestern University, Alison Yarrow, and zoologist and author Lucy Cook. This episode, what can I say? I feel like each week I say that this is one of my favorite episodes and I love it so much and it gets better with time, and I have nothing different to say about this episode. It was so good. So good, in fact, that I wish that this episode was solely dedicated towards a conversation between Meghan and Mellody. I loved the conversations between Mellody and Victoria. I've always been a fan of Mellody for years now. I remember the first time that I ever really knew who she was listening to her talk about financial literacy on, I can't remember the exact station, but it was one of the mainstream news media here in the US. And immediately I just became such a huge fan of her as a woman of color, and as a woman of color who for my undergrad and graduate degree is focused heavily on business aspect. She was just and is still such an iconic, inspirational woman. Just listen to the podcast and you'll hear a little bit more about her humble beginnings. And also, you gotta listen to Mellody's TED Talk. It became viral for a reason. It is so incredible. But seeing her on mainstream media, a woman of color, talking about financial literacy in such an open and honest way, in a way that is not full of like crazy jargon. It's good enough and basic enough for anyone to understand what she's saying. And she wasn't just regurgitating facts that you can read in a textbook or Google. You can just really tell that this is a woman that speaks from years and years of experience, and you look at her life and you can tell that she doesn't just talk the talk, she walks the walk. So the conversations between Mellody and Meghan was the highlight for me. I genuinely enjoyed the conversation with Victoria as well. So I hope, or I wish rather, that this episode would have been solely focused on Mellody and then maybe another episode just for Victoria, because oh my God, her story, wow, incredible. That's one strong, inspirational woman, Miss Victoria Jackson. For those of you who don't know, both Mellody and Meghan were both speakers at the Deal Book Online Summit for the New York Times back in 2021, and the conversation between Mellody and Meghan was focused on, I think that the topic was minding the gap. And it was such a great conversation then, and this conversation dug more into Mellody's life. You learn about her very, very humble beginnings and how she essentially rose to the top of her career, you know. And we all know as women, it's such a hard thing to navigate, much less a woman of color who wasn't born into a family that had a lot of money and a lot of resources. So the conversation, again, it is so good, and I wish we got more time with Mellody. If you haven't listened, definitely listen to it. And if you have, let me know. Did you enjoy the conversation with Mellody and Meghan? What about Victoria? What about the other ladies? Now, after listening to the podcast, you guys know that I like to do a little bit of snooping on social media just to see, like, well, who's saying what are the people getting from the podcast? Did they love it as much as I did? What are the conversations happening around the episode? Because we know people love to chat about archetypes, fans and detractors alike. You know, they pay as much attention to each archetype episode as much as we, the fans, do. It's crazy. But one of the most prevalent themes that I saw was a lot of people really chuckling over the fact that Meghan, again, much like Harry with the naming of the book Spare, is reclaiming power to all of these nasty stereotypes and names that she was called during her short stay as a senior working member of the British royal family. And we know, I mean, all you have to do is do a Google search of Duchess Difficult to see all the nasty stories written about her, many of which was sourced from these unnamed palace sources. And we know those aides and courtiers of the palace, they love to chat with the media. They love to talk smack about Meghan. They love to leak those nasty stories. And I mean, as frustrating as it is to read those stories and see how horrible they were to her, it was sort of a blessing in disguise, because when the palace and the media of the UK, particularly the tabloids, tried to paint Meghan as a bully, and you know, the royalist fandom loved to use that. Oh my God, she's a narcissist, she's a bully, she's a this, she's a that, she's a horrible person. What did she do? And not one person can name a name or say a thing that she had done to anyone. But anyone with half a brain can go on Google and see all the nasty things that they would say about her. How lazy they were, not wanting to work for her. The nasty names they call her, taking bets on how long her marriage would last. Right? Essentially bullying her and proudly proclaiming just how nasty they were to her via the royal reporters. So that's why when the palace tried to say, well, you know, we did the investigation and we're not going to release the findings, the hashtag royal family lied trended for days globally. Because yeah, the royal fandom is very loud and they're very nasty. But guess what? There's a whole big wide world who sees things for what it is. And there are moments where everyone just sort of gets tired of the loud noise from a small place and sort of reacts. We see that when Queen Elizabeth passed, I mean, Jesus Christ, social media was, I don't think I even expected to see such a reaction to her death, to the point where you see royalists were getting their panties in a bunch, you know, a lot of them saying, oh my God, I can't believe you're saying that. You're disrespecting someone who's just passed. And while I don't ever believe in people being rude about, you know, someone's life being lost, you can't just turn a blind eye to the way that a lot of people around the world really feel about that institution, and a lot of people within that institution. And a lot of people, even though they're not royal watchers and they're not particularly invested, they can see through the BS, and they can see that all of these words like difficult that were labeled on Meghan, and a bully and a this and a that, is nonsense, right? And someone also said something about, you know, when Meghan works in organizations and teams that are used to and expect certain standards, they all love her. But while she worked for the firm, an organization that is very archaic and for the most part prefers when the women just look good and kind of stay quiet, you know, don't make any big moves, then that firm hated her. And that's true, and it's not Meghan alone. I mean, you know, they hated Diana as well, which is crazy because you'd think she's beautiful, she's smart, she's dynamic, she's popular, she's well liked. Why wouldn't you see that person as an asset? But they didn't then, and they still haven't remedied the situation. And the same way that they saw Diana as an adversary is the same way that they're treating Meghan. But the thing is, you know, there's a big wide world and there's social media. And there's so many of us who see a lot of things that were thrown onto Meghan and the way that she was treated. And we recognize that because a lot of us sometimes in certain spaces experience those microaggressions, experience those nasty stereotypes and archetypes. I know I have. You know, for my undergrad degree, I went to a school where there wasn't a lot of people like me. You know, not just for my undergrad, but for like internships and like first jobs. You know, there's spaces where I've been where wasn't called difficult, but a lot of the topics that discuss like a little bit too aggressive, and you know, you have to kind of watch how you say things, and it discussed that in this episode as well. Remember, in the Angry Black Woman episode with Isa had talked about how, you know, when she was just expressing what she would like in certain spaces, she would sort of like use a question, you know, so her comment doesn't seem as so forceful. And Meghan said that she didn't use the question, but there was a certain inflection in her voice to sort of soften the blow of what she's saying. And this week, Mellody even spoke about being around people working in Fortune 500 companies and her learning how to navigate that space, because just right off the bat, they're intimidated by her, you know, a strong-minded Black woman in a space where there's just not a lot of people like her. And even Victoria, who isn't a Black woman, she's a Caucasian lady, talked about entering spaces where she, as a woman, she had to find ways to navigate a very challenging space as well. So, as with every episode, there are certain things that are very relatable, and you wouldn't think so, mainly because the people in the conversations are very strong women who are, you know, masters in their various fields. Serena Williams for sports. You see Mariah Carey in the music industry. Paris Hilton, a popular and rich heiress. Mellody, who rose from such humble beginnings. Victoria has been through something so traumatic as SA. You know, and they all are very popular, well-known women where you would think, well, what do I have in common with these women? What can I possibly relate to? And you listen to their conversations, to their stories laid bare on these episodes, and you're like, holy moly, I am not alone. We are very different, but in a lot of ways, we're very similar. So if you haven't listened to this week's episode, I urge you to do that. And if you have, again, don't be afraid. Let me know what you think of it in the comment section. Side note, I forgot that Mellody had met Prince Harry, I believe at the 2017 Obama Foundation Summit. Don't quote me on the date, but I believe it's 2017. And I can't remember who. I don't think Meghan specified, but someone said that Mellody should definitely be her mentor. And boy, oh boy, what I wouldn't give to have her as my mentor. She's just such a cool and inspirational woman. I love this episode so much. But like people say on social media, it's been really interesting seeing the reactions from so many of the people across the pond who have the most to say, happily calling Meghan Duchess Difficult, and she's a narcissist, and she's this. I mean, like, the headlines are just so vile. I can't believe that there are pockets of the press that are allowed to be so attacking and vitriolic, but this is the world that we live in, unfortunately. But I love Meghan's fighting spirit and the fact that she doesn't back down, okay? And these episodes of Archetypes just does it for me, because she is one by one addressing all of the nasty things that they have tried to label her with, that tried to drag her down with, and use these archetypes and these stereotypes to paint her to be a bad person. This episode was incredible, and by the end of the day we saw a photo of Meghan looking carefree and happy, showing that she voted and provided little helpful tips for voters on the Archewell website. Saw her rocking that Archewell merch, the hat. We saw Prince Harry wore it, I believe, around the polo season, so it was nice to see her rocking it. I don't know why they don't provide merch. Like, come on, Archewell, what you doing? Have a merch section. We're gonna buy it. Now, before I forget, her campus has named Archetypes as one of the 5 podcasts to make you feel like the main character. Talking about the production value and all of the wonderful guests that have been featured on the podcast, and all of the sexist labels and how harmful they can be. And I really love that. The thing I love most about that, even though we know like Archetypes and anything Meghan does gets a lot of media coverage, but this podcast being featured on that particular magazine or blog just really speaks to how in tune the work that Meghan does, the content that she creates. It's very in tune to us females, but also to the younger crowd, the college girls who are navigating life. Again, it's such a wasted opportunity for the royal establishment with the way that they just weren't able to recognize what a good fit she could have been for that institution. Now, because I'm not a royalist, selfishly, I'm happy that her work and her work ethic is not wasted on that institution, because in my mind, I don't understand what value it brings to our modern day society. But, oh well, their loss, our gain. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, hit that notification bell.